these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back to Hold These Truths. Really honored today, for the first time, to have Dr. Condoleezza Rice on the podcast. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
It's really cool to have you. We've met before when I came through Hoover, and that was a long time ago. And too much time has passed. So glad to see you here in D.C. You're taking some meetings. You're still in the game in such an amazing way. I mean, head of Hoover Institution since you left. Tell me.
2021.
Okay.
Yeah, so right in the middle of COVID, I might know.
Oh, you took over that recently?
Yes, right. Yeah.
I thought it was a lot longer than that.
Yeah,
Okay.
No, this is my 5th year as director.
Really? Okay. So I guess when I met you then, it was.
I was at Hoover, but I was at Hoover as a fellow at that point.
Okay.
Because when I came back from government, it's actually a good story. Everybody was saying, well, what are you going to do? I mean, are you going to stay in Washington? Are you going to?
Yeah. Because you're not like super. You're not old.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But it never, never occurred to me.
You keep working. You can't just keep drawing. So
and I always figured I was going to go back to Hoover, back to Stanford.
Yeah.
That's home for me. I've been there more than 40 years.
Yeah.
And now students are coming up to me and saying, "You were my mother's advisor." So
Really?
I've been there a while.
Wow, you've been there a while. Yeah. But you did take a break from there at a certain point, right? Yeah. And from 2001 to 2005, National Security Advisor to President George W. Bush, and U.S. Secretary of State from 2005 to 2009. So also worth noting, long been an expert on Russia. You speak fluent Russian.
Yeah.
Also a concert pianist, just in case people were wondering. Just a long time leader on strategic thinking and foreign affairs and foreign policy, and as of late, really talking a lot about Civic. So I think we'll start there. Yeah. It's sort of an easy button before we get into like all the maybe, I don't know if it's tougher, but all the foreign policy issues facing us, and talk about what you're doing up here and what kind of message you're sending to the White House and to those of us in Congress. But I think so. One of the programs that's at Hoover is, I don't know what it's called. Maybe I'm sure you do. What's it called?
So there's the Civics initiative that
Okay.
we're actually doing with Stanford. But there are other aspects of it too. We have a history lab that's thinking about how to teach history the way that we once learned it, which is about the institutions, about political history, about military history, rather than kind of bottoms up, social history. But we really believe strongly that the educated student needs to understand the institutions that came into being starting almost 250 years ago with the Declaration of Independence and then on through the Constitution, because if you don't understand the institutions of democracy, you can't use them. And there's really, in the American public, just not enough understanding, not enough knowledge about what the institutions are, how they work, how really kind of perfectly balanced they were. The Founding Fathers were just amazing, how they thought that you could self-govern through these abstractions called a constitution and rule of law and elections. And so we also know that all of the polling shows that Americans are losing faith in those institutions across the board. And so we're doing some work on why that might be the case and what remedies could you have to make that better.
Yeah, it does seem to be the case. People seem to be angrier and less informed about who does what. Right. We see that all the time. I have to remind folks, I'm not a dictator. Yeah. Do you want me to be a dictator? Is that where you're going with this line of questioning? You're mad with this wasn't accomplished? I mean, should it be easy to accomplish something at a national level? Right. People ask me, are you frustrated with the way it works and how hard it is to accomplish something? I say, well, should it be that easy? Should it be easy to make national law for this many people?
No. In fact, I think that the institutional design was that it wouldn't be easy.
Yeah.
And it would require compromise because you weren't always going to get your way. Mm-hmm. I do think it's important that the Congress functions. It's important that the branches of government are all functioning. And oh, by the way, also, what's happened with the administrative state and that has taken over a lot of the functions of what would have been the branches of government. We have to be concerned about that. I do think that the way that we get our information now tends to put us into little pods. I only talk to people who think like I do. I only listen to the podcasts that think like I do. And when you do that, you never encounter anybody who thinks differently. And now when you do encounter somebody who thinks differently, you think they're either stupid or venal. And so one of the things that I think we have to do in civics education, and it's really degraded in universities, is to say to people, to our students, you have to encounter ideas that are different from your own. Don't go to places where people say amen to everything you say. And, oh, by the way, some of those conversations may even be uncomfortable.
Well, it's definitely degraded in universities, but I don't, that gets to a couple other questions, like what's the curriculum that we're supposed to have in universities? It's, in theory, you're majoring in something at a university. So if you're a math major, are you really taking civics lessons? Now, obviously, most four-year degrees require you to take some kind of electives, but they're just that, electives, and you don't have to take civics. What about K through 12? I mean, does that really just depend on where you're at?
Well, let me just say a little bit about the electives. I actually think we need to, and we've gone back to a little bit at Stanford of something called college. So in your first 3 quarters, you're actually taking a general curriculum with other students. So you do get introduced to things like citizenship. What does that mean? You get introduced to the contestation of ideas, that you have to learn to make an argument, mobilize evidence, and listen to somebody who might disagree. So that's important, whatever your major is.
Yeah, that is critical thinking, writing.
And critical thinking, writing, persuasive writing, and even, I would say, because I tell my students this, some quantitative skills as well. You need to have
just some
statistics.
You'd
like to
figure out
be able to
differential
tell
equations just yet,
but you'd like to be able to tell the difference between causality and correlation, right? You'd like to be able to, you'd like to be able to have some sense. You don't have to be a coder, but in the world that we live in, you have to know something about how that technology works. So I do think there's a curriculum that every educated person ought to have, and then you go ahead and you specialize and you major and the like. But in K-12, we need to start with can our kids read and do arithmetic, which too few of them can. I want to get very basic.
Your basics.
Let's get basic.
Writing is everything.
And writing is critical.
I speak to more and more members, more and more business owners, and this topic has come up a lot. I don't know when it changed, and it's only going to get worse as we learn that AI can just write everything for us. And maybe we can edit it a little bit, but we're not doing the hard work of thinking. I kind of like Jordan Peterson said this. He's like, you can't differentiate between thinking and writing. They are the same thing.
They are the same thing.
And that's a really deep thought, I suppose. And
well, we have to convince our students that even if ChatGPT might make it easy, who said education was supposed to be easy?
Yeah, and it works. I did a little interesting experiment on AI because I was just at this AI conference for the last week with the Aspen Institute, and during one of the mornings, I had my computer out, and I realized I've been meaning to write this op-ed on why we need a counterinsurgency doctrine against the cartels in Mexico. Curious what you think of that, but it's not on our list of topics today. But we need a counterinsurgency strategy against the cartels. I would say Mexico's a mix of Iraq and Colombia with a sprinkle of Afghanistan and even Ukraine, only in the sense of that's the most modern way for us to legislate money towards a problem. But other than that, the situation's obviously a mix of those other three, because it's not quite Colombia. There's no Marxist guerrillas running around. But you have an insurgency in an environment that looks a lot like Iraq. Which is interesting.
I would even say, because I was here when we turned Colombia around. Because
I was there when Bush announced I was in 10th grade in Colombia.
You were in 10th grade.
I remember the plan Colombia.
You could have gone all year without telling me you were in 10th grade when I was doing that. But in any case, I was. We did Colombia, and we needed 3 things. We needed committed leadership, which we got in Uribe. We needed a willingness to get really tough on the FARC. When we came in office, 30% of Colombia could not be entered by the Colombian police or by the Colombian military. They were being outgunned.
Right.
And then we helped them with training and intelligence and a variety of things. There's some real similarities to what is faced in Mexico, different, but similarities. And so the real story is you need committed leadership. You need some cooperation with the United States to bring some of the elements that they don't have. And I hope we can get it done, because this is a huge problem for the country.
Yeah, I mean, and now, and that's a key point. I wouldn't have bothered putting all this effort into a counterinsurgency strategy a year ago under President Obrador. President Sheinbaum's a lot different, and her national security team's a lot different. But anyway, the point is, I asked AI to write about that, and it did a pretty good job. I mean, it was I couldn't find any problems with it, except it wasn't the problem with it wasn't my style, right? There was a couple key points that it could not possibly know I wanted to put in there, that I would need to put in there. There's a style to writing. If it should be obvious if someone writes something, ghost writes something for me, and I write it because I personally have a unique style. So I still wrote my own thing. But it was interesting at how good it got some of the nuances too, because this is a difficult subject, and it's a subject not a lot of people understand. For instance, it even got into the political and diplomatic difficulties and the history with Mexico and how that creates problems that you need to be very careful about how you overcome. Because you want that cooperation you talked about. Well, there's a reason the Colombians have always been like, come on in, just bring all the American stuff, help us. They've always been that way. Mexicans have not.
That's right.
So it's a very different, anyway, but AI has totally flipped that, where I'm like, this is a good, I just opened up Word, and all of a sudden, I guess Microsoft now has an AI bot, and at the top of Word, it just says, what do you need? I was like, well, since you asked, I need an op-ed, and I needed to be 700 words, and I needed to say, I only gave it like a 2-sentence prompt. I was just testing it because I happened to be at an AI conference. I'm like, why not?
But the difference is that subject, right?
So I can read it and edit it. I can
know what is true. You know whether it's hallucinating in some fashion.
Which is the scary part. I know it's good.
You know it's good, but you know it's good because you know the subject. And what we have to convince somebody who's coming at it cold is, if you go into an AI agent and you have it written and you actually don't know anything about it, now you're actually vulnerable.
You're taking a lot of risk.
You're taking a lot of risk, and not to mention you're not really learning anything.
And I think one of the first things, one of the easy buttons, I come out of a lot of AI discussions not knowing what we need to do about AI. Maybe y'all at Hoover have figured that out. Maybe tell us. But some of the easy buttons, I think we start with the easy buttons, and some of the easy buttons are like digital watermarking. So if there's a product, whether it's a video or a picture or an essay that comes from AI, it needs to be detectable easily. I'm not sure how to do that, but I know the companies could figure it out, and a lot of them ask for this.
They do, and they're starting. They're working on it. One of the things we've done at Hoover is to work. It's called the Stanford Emerging Technology Review, because I actually co-chair it with the Dean of Engineering, and we sit right there on one campus where we can be with the best computer scientists, the best bioengineers, and they're aware that some of these problems. I actually had a colleague who had a deep fake that was so convincing that the only reason the person on the other end knew was the deep fake asked a question that person said, they would never ask that. So, but watermarking, they're working on that. They're working on AI models that might take less energy, because one of the big problems in AI is we're going to have to fuel these huge models, and our energy supply to do it is not very great.
That's a double-edged sword. Because now you're allowing lesser well-equipped or lesser well-endowed actors to now create very advanced AI models,
that's right.
Which is kind of scary.
Well, in that sense, DeepSeek was the Chinese model. But I'm going to tell you something, the computer scientists, not a single one of them was surprised by DeepSeek.
Yeah.
The national security community, everybody was surprised by DeepSeek. And that suggests to me that, because this is something I've been very concerned about, our ability to see what's coming across over the horizon is really going to be very important. There's no way that I think our intelligence agencies have any idea how to collect on some of this. And so I want to make sure that we are staying on top of sometimes what is very open source. These papers have been published for months about DeepSeek.
Yeah, and the models themselves are open source, or at least some of them, and I think DeepSeek took advantage of that. And so it's not this. I think people freaked out a lot. Like, how did they do it so quick? Well, I mean, the bike had already been built. They had the designs. They just did it. It's not that crazy, but we're not that far away from it advancing to pretty obscene levels, and there's some interesting dangers along with that. One of the good questions that was asked too was about liability. How do you? And there's actually a case now I learned where a kid was chatting with an AI bot where the AI bot was playing Princess on Game of Thrones, and that conversation led to suicide.
Yeah.
And so now the family's suing the makers of that AI, and that'll be an interesting case.
That's going to be, and we've already had cases with social media and trying to think about who's liable, and this whole debate about are these just platforms or are these content providers? We've been going down this road. What are the First Amendment implications of all of this? But my own view, and it's not always popular among my national security colleagues, but my own view is that we actually need to run hard and fast. Yeah. And some of the problems we'll have to leave to work out as they arise. Yeah. Because we cannot lose. We are actually now in a technological arms race with the Chinese. Yeah. There are only two players in this. It's China and the United States. Great Britain a little bit on the AI side. Europe has kind of dealt itself out of it because it really doesn't have an innovation ecosystem. And so we have to run hard and fast. I trust that, since talking about institutions and civics, if something goes wrong with one of these, we will have investigative reporting. We will have congressional hearings. You'll be the first to call them. Yeah. We'll have liability suits and the like in our courts. If it happens in China that some great breakthrough, they will do what they did about COVID. Yeah. They'll hide it. We won't know what happened, and we'll get surprised. So I would rather run hard and fast. And some of the regulation and what are we trying to solve for in terms of the harder parts or the dangerous parts? We may have to live with some of that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of maybe not who you're talking to, but from what I hear, I think there's a lot of consensus around that. We just don't have a choice, but to run fast and hard at it. Right. You could sign a deal with the Chinese about mitigating how smart you let your AI get, and you could think about AI like in terms of nuclear proliferation treaties. It's not too dissimilar, but it's a little bit harder, not impossible, but a little bit harder to verify what they're doing. And so just seems like it's not worth it, at least not yet. And I just hope we are going to run into some kind of problem, and I worry about like a rogue agent. Because and I've asked the experts about this. Can there be a rogue actor, an AI actor that sort of escapes the matrix, and then wants to get rich, and maybe wants to, because it's designed to mimic human behavior. But I always ask, well, what kind of human behavior?
Well, there've been stories recently of AI agents that refuse to shut down.
Yeah, we saw that one last week.
So yes, one person that I talk to about this frequently says, just don't put it in a body. So just don't put it in a robot.
Well, it's definitely going in a robot soon, though.
And I said, are you talking about like the Star Wars robots? Is that what you're worried about? So, there's some kind of hairy things out there. And the one thing I'll say is it's not just AI. There are hairy things out there in bioengineering, where we may be even further behind the Chinese than we recognize. Robotics, of course, what you might do in space. There are a lot of these technologies that are frontier, kind of civilizational technologies, and our institutions, to return to the first question, are kind of slower moving and not quite certain how to deal with it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to that then. I mean, how do you even tackle the K-12 issue, especially as to the federal government, where it's really a state level issue, and our reading and math scores keep going down. I mean, there's definitely wide disparities. You can visit, as a congressman, we visit a bunch of different schools, and there's a bunch of different outcomes at different schools. So sometimes you're just amazed by what these kids are learning and how advanced they are, and what kind of extra additional sort of let's call it, career-oriented skill sets that they're learning. And then other times you just can't believe how bad our situation is. So, and it feels like the more money we spend doesn't have a correlation with success either. So
that's right.
it gets down to this problem at the home, and that's now we're really out of luck because I don't know how to solve a problem at home.
Well, I don't know how to solve the problem in the home. I do know that your chances, if your zip code's bad, are a lot worse than if your zip code's good. Mm-hmm. And so if I focus on where a lot of the problem is, it's giving poor kids who perhaps don't have at home the kind of support that other kids might have a chance to get to a better school if necessary. It's why I'm a big believer in school choice. It's not that I want to abandon the public schools. Even if you had the widest variety of school choice, you're still going to have probably 65% of kids in public schools. So we need to work on that too. But in the meantime, letting parents have a choice, because we have a choice system. Mm-hmm. If you are of means, you will move to a district where the schools are good and the houses are probably expensive.
Yeah, that's a good counter-argument that it's not said enough, and especially in as we have debated this in Texas, now.
I know you're debating, and think about that. If you are really wealthy, send your kids to private school, right? Mm-hmm. So who's stuck in failing neighborhood schools? Poor kids, mm-hmm. and they're the ones who don't have a choice.
Right.
So I hope there's more of a choice movement. I also hope that the public schools, we've been doing some work on this at Hoover. My mother was a teacher. I have enormous respect for teachers, but only for good teachers. And there has to be some way to call teachers who are not good teachers. And so we have a lot of work to do, but getting K-12 right is part of it. And then, the discussions have been more about what do you do post K-12, because not every kid really wants to or should go to college. And we are pretty woeful at training people in job skills that would be useful. If you wanted to bring manufacturing back to this country, you wouldn't have welders, you wouldn't have electricians. And so I always say that we need a kind of human potential effort. No more third graders who can't read. No more 21-year-olds with a useless college degree and a lot of debt, mm-hmm. and no more 35-year-olds that we can't retrain, because we're going to be retraining people all the time.
And on the note of civics, I mean, what's the first thing, so if you design a civics curriculum, what do you think the first thing is that kids need to learn? I have my own ideas on this because I did design a civics curriculum I'll tell you about, but I'll let you go first.
There are 3 branches of government.
Just start with that. Okay.
And the way you make change is that you have to know how to use those branches of government. So I give the following example. I was born in segregated Birmingham, and so the Civil Rights Act passed when I was 9 years old. The story that you will read about the Civil Rights Movement is it was about protests in Birmingham, my hometown. It was about the march in Selma. It was about the violence of Bull Connor against the kids. All of that's true. But it was also about Thurgood Marshall sitting at a table for 20 years deciding which cases to take to the courts to try to break down segregation, like Brown versus the Board of Education. And then it was the story of legislation that now reversed and overcame state legislation that was discriminatory, right? All branches of government had to be used, and we've had cases before the courts, legislation, and of course, direct action or protest. But if you ask my students, even at, well-studied students, what's the way? Well, you protest. Well, yeah, but you have to have some idea of how you're going to get change made. And that's called politics and institutions, and that's harder. Yeah. So part of the civics lesson, once you get past there are 3 branches of government, is how do you actually use them? Yeah. And also an understanding that we have something else in the United States that really helps us. We have something called federalism. I very often tell my students now, why don't you go, with all due respect, instead of going to Washington, go work for a state legislator. Yeah. Go work in a mayor's office.
Or if you're so concerned about this issue that makes you protest it, why not go do something about it now? Because that issue, as long as it's not an issue in a far off land, which is what they usually choose, because I think people gravitate towards things they can't possibly control.
Solve,
it's almost like, for some reason, there's like a comfort level with that. But sometimes they're protesting something very local.
Yeah.
Why are you writing to me?
Yeah.
First of all, it's not even within my my jurisdiction, but go do it.
Go do it.
Make it.
And by the way, it matters. So I live in California. Probably people are familiar with some of the problems in San Francisco. The kind of quintessential moment was when one of the young members of the San Francisco 49ers was shot on Union Square in broad daylight at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Oh.
And people kind of went, what is going on in this city?
That's crazy.
They then, in the mayoral election, the real issue was public safety. And people didn't just go to the mayor, they actually turned over the Board of Supervisors to people who were. So local action is really important, and we don't teach in our civics enough about the role of states and localities and civil society, which we invented in 1835 when de Tocqueville came here. He talked about these voluntary associations of Americans just to do good. We would think of it now as Boys and Girls Clubs and American Red Cross and so forth. So we have a very elaborate system supporting democracy. And finding your place in it is not always just going to protest.
The thing I tell kids too is they'll ask, how do I get involved? And I say, well, a number of ways, right? There's through all those different associations, you could get into policy, you could get into politics.
Right.
These are different tracks, related but different. But also, it's okay to wait. People are like, how do I become a politician? I'm like, do something totally different first.
Exactly.
Because you're going to be a terrible politician if all you want to be is a politician.
I
You should do
completely agree.
something else.
Completely agree.
On my first lecture, because I have an 8-part series. It's not out yet, but it's why we even have a government. It's even more basic than the 3 branches. It's simply why do we even have a need to self-organize in the first place? Like from the tribe, like going back from the tribes to what we have now. I thought that was an interesting kind of thing to think through because it gets to this idea of, let's transport the classroom to a desert island. What are you going to do? Well, how are you going to hold elections? You can't even hold elections yet, actually. You need to agree on rules to even how those elections are going to be put out. How do you agree on those rules? Do you first just decide that somebody's in charge and then go from there? It's not obvious how you even start a system. And once you start thinking through that, you can see, and then you can infuse some of our founders' thinking and see how you eventually get to where you get to. Is it a council? Is there a leader of the council? Because it's just an island, but as it grows bigger, do you add more members to whatever that council? Does it become a parliament? Does it become a Congress? What are the different factions within it? Is it, there's people who live on the beach of this desert island. There's people who live in the caves of the desert island. Maybe there's fishermen, there's farm. I don't know. There's different equities. You've got to figure out who's going to settle disputes. What if Sally gets into a fight with Jenny? I don't know. Who arbitrates that?
By the way, I do a lot of simulations with my students where I'll put some question to them and they have to recognize the organizational difficulties of that and the difficulty of solving disputes, because one of the problems that everybody faces in government, particularly if you've been in policymaking, is everybody actually thinks it's easy. When I was secretary, I hated waking up reading the headline in the Washington Post, the Bush administration should bring pressure on Iran to stop its nuclear program. And I'm thinking, why didn't I think of that? Boy, what an insight. So part of it is people don't actually recognize that the process is hard because you do have to bring differing views to bear. That's what democracies are. Autocracies, one guy can make a decision. But if anybody's got what I call autocrat envy, just remember that when they make a mistake, they make a huge mistake. So the one-child policy, big mistake. Now 34 million Chinese men don't have mates. So understanding democracy and being willing to be a part of it, that's the core of civics.
Yeah, and it's fun to teach, as it turns out, and I think people are craving it. We do a youth summit once a year. We'd love to have you at it. It'll be in September, about 500 high school kids, and we do a day of civics.
That's great.
Well, you mentioned Iran, so it's a good time to maybe jump out of the United States and into the world for a moment in our limited time that we have here together. There's some proposals for a new Iran deal. It's like we've been having this conversation for
a long time,
very long time. What I'll leave it there. What do you think?
Let me start with there are no moderates in Iran. Let me start there. It's a theocracy. There's only one decision maker. It's the Ayatollah. And I think Iran is at its low point now in terms of its vulnerabilities for a long time. The Israelis have really disabled their proxies, and Iran is a little bit cowardly. They like to fight through their proxies. So now that Hezbollah is more disabled, Hamas is kind of on the ropes. Apparently, the Houthi got the message, apparently. So the proxies are down. The Israelis also did a lot of damage to the Iranian air defense systems and the like. And so if you're going to cut a deal with the Iranians, this is the time to cut a maximalist deal with the Iranians. And that starts with you will stop enriching. And you will turn over the fuel that you have enriched to somebody else. You can turn over the IAEA if you want, the International Atomic Energy Agency. You can turn it over to us, the United States, but you will turn it over. That, I think, has to be the basis of a deal, because allowing them to enrich at all misunderstands that enriching is, once you've solved the scientific problem of how to enrich, it's only a matter of the engineering one day till you get to weapons grade.
Yeah, as we've seen, yeah.
And so I think if you're going to have a deal, it better be pretty maximalist at this point.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, especially since it appears to me that the Trump administration is trying to prevent a war, because it seemed to me that Israel was just on the verge. Seeing Iran in this weakened position had come to a calculation that it made more sense for them to simply hit the nuclear facilities now. Given that there had been 2 waves of strikes against Israel and not a single one hit down. I think that was, and luckily I don't know this, otherwise it'd be giving away secrets, but it's a pretty good guess. And so I think the Trump administration is perhaps saying, hey, let's try this first. But if you're going to try it, like you said, it needs to be a maximalist policy.
I have no problem with trying it. No problem with trying it. And they'll be tough-minded, I think. So I don't have a problem.
Yeah, it's a little
there.
unclear what their proposals are at the moment. They're a little vague. They do allow for some enrichment according to one proposal we've seen, but sometimes things get leaked and we have no idea what the real story is.
We actually had UN Security Council resolutions that actually even had the Russians on the paper that they couldn't enrich. And the second, not the first Obama administration, the second Obama administration gave that up, and they started enriching. So I think that's the core. You could say to the Iranians, there are several pieces to this. There's your bomb design, there's your delivery vehicle, there's the fuel. Don't ever think about putting them together into a usable nuclear weapon. So there are lots of ways to handle this, but I think if this administration, of all administrations, gives in on the enrichment piece, it's going to be not a great signal, and not a great signal to our allies in the Gulf as well, who are very concerned about this.
Right. Yeah. One thing about Iran is was it 2004 they issued the declaration to end their nuclear weapons program, and it's something I point out. And this is leading into another question that I'm sure you've gotten a million times throughout the last 20 years, which is your thoughts on Iraq, knowing everything you know now. But I encourage people to have nuanced thoughts, especially when taking an objective look at history. Now, look, if you make me go back in time, I might make some different decisions. Okay. But I also am weary of doing so, because the multiverse is an interesting place, as Marvel has taught us. And in this case, you can imagine what the scenario looks like if you just leave it alone. And one of those scenarios is that decree in 2004 by Iran never happens, because it's pretty obvious, I think, that it only happened because we invaded 2 countries in the last couple of years, one on the premise of WMD. So I think obviously we saw Gaddafi give up his weapons shortly thereafter. Right. So there was a domino effect there, and you can imagine again a different universe where we don't invade, Iran has every inclination to keep building its program.
Yeah.
Saddam the same.
Right.
Even if they weren't full-fledged doing it at the moment, they would
Right.
that incentive structure would quickly change. And you could and then you have Israel probably and Saudi Arabia potentially openly developing nuclear weapons and being open about it. And you could have seen a very different history in the Middle East. I just want to point that out to people. I can't guarantee that because I don't have access to the multiverse. But it's worth thinking about. I tell people the same thing about the Russia-Ukraine issue. It's like, okay, so you don't think we should do anything for Ukraine. Got it. So you think we're in a better position in this other universe where Russia has its full army on the border of 4 more NATO countries, and you think that doesn't bring us closer to war?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe you're the warmonger.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the thinking of counterfactuals is important, but I'll wrap it up there and say, what do you think about that? But also, what are your thoughts 20 years later on the decisions to invade Iraq?
Well, I'd go back to what you started with. What you know today can affect what you do tomorrow, but not what you did yesterday, right? Yeah. So had we known that it wasn't that he didn't have elements of a weapons of mass destruction program. He did. It was not as far along, and he'd not reassembled it in the way that we thought he had.
Worth noting, he did have a much further along one after the first Gulf.
Well, I tell people all the time that Saddam Hussein's association with weapons of mass destruction was not theoretical.
Yeah, it was not.
He had used chemical weapons against the Iranians and the Kurds, and he was known to have been on the way to biological and nuclear weapons, so not theoretical. So let's just say I don't know if I had known, but I do know the following. I do think that it helped in terms of Libya and probably Iran. I do think that the world was better off without Saddam Hussein in Iraq threatening his neighbors and calling Kuwait the 17th province. Mm-hmm. I do think that the Iraqi government now, even though it's weak, has the potential to continue to be friendly to the United States. Mm-hmm. And I do think, and this also speaks to Afghanistan, that forward deployment of American forces to forward deployed bases is a part of our foreign policy and security strategy. If we can stay even in small numbers in Iraq, it gives us purchase on what's happening in Iran. And the Iraqis are going to get bolder as Iran gets weaker, because there is no love lost between Iraqi Shia and Iranian Shia. Mm-hmm. Secondly,
how true is that?
Oh, it's absolutely true. Okay. Because
there's not a loyalty there.
No. It goes back a long way. Iranians killing Iraqi Shia. Okay. It goes back to the fight over where
there's obviously Iranian-backed Shia militias in Iraq, that's more of a specific group. It's not the population.
An Iranian plant, right?
Yeah. I didn't spend a lot of time in that part of Iraq. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Al-Anbar. Yeah. I spent some time in Basra, but it was my first deployment. And it's not
So you were up in Al-Anbar where they were Sunni tribes.
I've operated mostly in Al-Anbar.
And that's one thing, by the way, I would go back into differently. I don't think we understood the role of the tribes until later.
There's a few obvious tactical issues. Getting rid of the bath, debathification.
Yeah, and a lot of mistakes there. But when I go back to Iran, there's no love lost there. But I want to just say one word about Afghanistan, which to me was a strategic and credibility disaster.
Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, the way we left. But also, if I had asked you, would I want to have a military base next to a country that has a 900-kilometer border with Iran, I might say yes.
Iran, Pakistan. It's near China.
Yeah, and we had a base in Bagram that was fully developed. On the days after 9/11,
there was McDonald's, there was Burger King. I've been there. Yeah, it's developed as an understatement. It's very developed.
It was developing, and when we had to go to war in Afghanistan after 9/11, we had to go around and beg those dictators like Karimov in Uzbekistan for the use of their airfields to be able to launch the activity, the war in Afghanistan, and so that was a strategic mistake. I don't want to make a similar strategic mistake in Iraq.
No. Well, we did, kind of. Obama did. And then ISIS came, and then we learned.
We're still kind of there. I think the Iraqis will, if we're not too loud about it, They
yeah,
can.
yeah.
They
No, I mean
tolerate it.
the big pullout in 2011,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And the rise of
right.
ISIS,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
the rest is history. And,
Yeah.
and it weird how the same exact thing happens just a bit more quickly, but happened in Afghanistan as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Really frustrating. And in our last few minutes, so I know your staff's going to yank you
Yeah.
out. Probably earlier than you need to, because I know how staff works. I know. I always look at my own clock,
Yeah,
but when they're
yeah,
trying to pull
right.
me, I'm like, we got time.
Well, the problem
No,
is
go.
I don't know where
They
I'm
don't.
going next, so I
Yeah,
kind of have to
I don't either.
maybe
But
depend on them.
we'll respect it
Yeah.
either way. And you mentioned something important, which is the need for American leadership and what national security actually means. You weren't just Secretary of State; you were a national security advisor.
Yeah.
I didn't even get a chance to ask you the history of you and Bush and how he even picked you, but
Yeah.
maybe for our next podcast.
Yes.
But a key part of this is American leadership in the world, and that's a real debate now, probably more than it has been in a long time. And it's unfortunate, and it's because it's just too esoteric to your average American as to why it matters. That we have to have some kind of leadership role in the world. And I try to simplify it the best I can. I say, look, national security is not having a bunch of Navy SEALs hanging out in Coronado Beach with our guns pointed out just waiting for the Chinese. If you think that's national security, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
National security in a small world, and we do live in a small world, not a big world. A big world was, heck, we haven't had a big world since maybe the 1600s. I don't know, really depending on how you view history. But, it used to take a long, long time to get anywhere. Now it takes... Hell, a hypersonic missile takes 30 minutes. So don't think that you live in a big world. You live in a small one, and having a forward deployed presence is everything. Because of alliances, because of eyes and ears on the ground, because of very basic real reasons. And the protection of global shipping is a very real national interest. How do we? What are we doing wrong?
I'd start the argument way that you just did. We thought we were protected by these great shores, and then came, of course, 9/11, and we realized actually they were here, which was a very good lesson in your small world story. But it's also that great powers don't mind their own business, right? They just don't.
Yeah,
they try to shape
some
the
of them
international
have 'em.
system. They try to shape the international system. So when you look at
Almost irrationally,
Yeah,
right?
almost irrationally, but it's-
China's they're irrational.
But that's who great powers are. Since human history, great powers have tried the Roman Empire.
They think things about us that are totally untrue for like 50 years.
Yeah, but think about how much great powers try to shape the international system, and what's the list of great powers that might shape it? Us, that's one. China, that's another. Russia, kind of, sort of. Not too many other options.
Yeah.
So I'll take us.
Right.
And if I'm going to see shaping the international system, I want to be the one shaping it. Because I think our values and our beliefs should shape the international system. And for kind of 80 years or so, we kind of sort of did. Now, I'm all for something that I think the Trump...
And worth noting what happened in those last 80
Yeah,
years.
right.
How has life changed in human history?
In human
And how
history.
the last 80 years went since D-Day? 'Cause maybe you're like me. I think D-Day is the most important day for America, besides the founding, because that's the day we decided to lead.
And the day we decided to lead, and largely we got peace and prosperity. The Soviet Union collapsed, etc. But I also say I understand that there needs to be some redistribution of the burden, if you want to call it that.
Oh yeah.
So I'm all for the Europeans paying more. I'm really glad.
Shaping involves alliances, does it not, right?
I'm really glad we've got Sweden and Finland in the alliance, because they can help us in the Arctic, which is a place that we tend not to think about
We don't
enough.
invest enough in,
I'm glad that we've got friends and allies in the Indo-Pacific that can help us with China. We probably need to treat them well so that they help. But I want to do the shaping. And I say to Americans also, if you think we can just withdraw, let me give you 3 dates. A war started in Europe in 1914. We thought we could sit it out. By 1916, 1917, we were drawn in. A war started in Europe.
And the world was a lot larger back then.
But then the war starts in 1938, and we think we can sit it out, and by 1941, we're drawn in. And then we're going along. We're talking about the peace dividend after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and we look up, and they're in New York, and at the Pentagon, and in a field in Pennsylvania. If you think you can sit this out, you cannot. And for those who say, well, let's turn toward China and leave the Russians and the Ukrainians on their own, if you think for 1 minute that Xi Jinping isn't watching our response to Ukraine, because I always say credibility is not divisible. You can't be credible here and not there.
Right.
And so I'm all for the redistribution. I think that everybody pays their fair share. Yes, let's look hard at how we think about trade and how we bring more back to the United States. All of that is fair game. And yes, we have to recognize that some of the experiment with the integration of China into the international economy didn't work. But U.S. leadership is as important today as it was in 1944.
Important for us. Again,
Important for us.
Important for us. It's a very much a self-serving, selfish goal.
That's right.
And I think people need to understand that about our. That's what I say about Ukraine. It doesn't. I don't have these whimsical no, it's for democracy and freedom, and human rights, and those are good things.
Yeah.
And if you don't care about those things,
Right.
that sucks. But that's not the argument I'm making. The argument I'm making is that this is fully a selfish goal. Because if you by the way, all those dates you mentioned, except for the 9/11, the other two dates, we didn't really have a global economy, to worry about.
That's right. And
now we do.
Now we do. Now we do.
What are you ultimately trying to control for in U.S. foreign policy? Chaos.
Yeah.
Chaos is bad for you. Whether you and they're like, well, how?
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm like, I need 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Because and that's why it's so hard to make that political argument to people, because you do need to be ready for that. You need to be able to show people supply chains and talk about look, okay, why did we take out those pirates or take out the Houthis?
Yes.
And we saw that debate play out in real time, interestingly enough, where Pete Hegseth comes over the top rails with some Harvard arguments about protecting global shipping, because because others were like, well, no, we're just bailing Europe out again. No, man, listen. If shipping does no longer feel safe, their insurance rates go up, which means global insurance rates go up, which means all prices go up.
Products are more expensive.
Or maybe it just won't exist anymore.
Well, I think that's one you can convince people, because defense of the sea lanes has been our responsibility for a long time. And we've done it very, very well. And not only do you have the Houthis, but you also, and this was the point that the president made, you also really don't want the Chinese at both ends of the Panama Canal. No. That's not good in our hemisphere.
Yeah.
So there's some very real-time, very granular visual things that you can say to people about the American role in the world.
But we don't do a good enough job.
We don't do a good enough job.
That's why I try to.
Well, it's really also it's dependent on people like you to go out to their constituents and talk about it in that way, because it can't all come out of Washington.
Yeah.
It surely can't all come out of universities, but it can come out of the people who were chosen to represent them. And if the people who chosen to represent them are going to talk about withdrawing, they're going to listen to that.
A lot of people get represented or get elected and then choose not to be leaders.
Yeah.
They see themselves, again, this is going back to our civics lessons, right? There's the trustee and there's the delegate.
Right.
Do you see yourself as a delegate or a trustee? I see myself as a trustee. I
Yeah.
tell you who I am, and that's how I'm going to act.
Yeah.
And if you don't like that, then you can come at me the next election cycle. But a delegate, maybe you can imagine a future, by the way, where there's like an AI delegate, because an AI is the only one who could potentially get the data necessary to do what the people want at any given moment. But I don't think you realize the complexities of what we're voting on every single day.
Yeah.
It's hard enough for us to do, let alone take a poll.
And I don't want our government is representative government. You choose your representatives wisely, and then they represent you. It doesn't mean that they don't keep a finger on the pulse. Mm-hmm. But that's another civics lesson.
Yeah.
Which is that when you elect somebody, you're electing them to take care of your affairs in that way. And I find, having never been elected to anything in my life except president of my family when I was 4, because my parents thought I should have that experience, but having never really been elected to anything in my life, I find that most Americans actually don't want to be part of every decision.
Yeah.
They want to trust that they've elected people who represent their values, who have their best interest at heart, who are going to try to get things done. They have some just kind of very basic ideas about what representative government ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, part of the civics lesson, too.
We've got a lot of those, but you're out of time. Unfortunately, your staff's going to pull you out, so we could go for 2 more hours. But
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. It's been an absolute honor to have you here.
Thank you.
And safe travels back to D.C. Hope your meetings go well.
Thank you.
And look forward to teaching civics at Hoover.
You're going to get that invitation. All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.